I've spent over a decade as a backcountry guide in some of the most isolated terrain in North America, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that the wilderness doesn't care about your plans, your experience, or your will to survive. My name is Mark, and 4 autumns ago, I took on a surveying contract in the Bitterroot Mountains that I genuinely believed would be routine. The Forest Service had my itinerary, my gear was dialed in, and I was looking forward to a week of solitude placing boundary markers. The first 36 hours unfolded exactly as expected: cold, quiet, productive. Then, the weather shifted violently. What started as light flurries became a relentless dump of snow that buried the landscape and my confidence along with it. I was navigating a treacherous ridge, focused entirely on not sliding into a ravine, when my right foot found a patch of ice disguised by fresh powder. The fall was sudden and brutal. I slid maybe 20 feet before slamming into a fallen log, and the immediate searing pain in my ankle told me something was seriously wrong. Standing was excruciating, and putting any real weight on that leg was impossible. I was maybe 3 miles from my tent, and the sun was already starting its descent. Limping back towards camp, I noticed something that made me pause: a set of boot prints in the snow ahead of me, heading the same direction. They looked fresh, the edges still sharp despite the ongoing snowfall. I figured it was a hunter or maybe another hiker, so I kept moving, trying to ignore the throbbing in my ankle. But soon I started hearing sounds that didn't fit the rhythm of the storm, the distinct crunch of footsteps that seemed to mimic my own, but with a slight, unsettling delay. Every time I stopped, the sound continued for 1 or 2 extra beats before going silent. My mind raced through possibilities: a curious deer, a mountain lion sizing me up, but the cadence was too deliberate, too human. I was a liability out there, completely unable to run or defend myself if something decided to close the distance. The fear really crystallized when I noticed the tracks ahead of me had simply vanished. I spun around, searching for a side trail, for any sign of where they'd gone, and that's when I saw them. A second set of prints, coming out of the tree line to my left, now running perfectly parallel to my own path, just 50 yards into the woods. Whoever had been in front of me was now keeping pace with me, hidden just behind the curtain of snow and trees. I made the stupid decision to call out, asking if someone was there. The only response was the wind. Panic started to claw at my throat. My camp was close, a fragile sanctuary in my mind, and I focused everything on reaching it. I didn't hear the footsteps anymore, but the silence was somehow worse. I was maybe 100 yards from my tent when I heard a heavy branch snap behind me, a sound too sharp and deliberate to be the storm. I didn't look back. I just hobbled faster, fueled by pure adrenaline. I finally collapsed inside my tent, the thin nylon doing nothing to quell the terror. I started shoving my gear into my pack, desperate to leave, when I heard it: the unmistakable sound of footsteps circling my tent. Slow, deliberate, crunching a perfect loop in the snow. It went on for what felt like an eternity, maybe 5 minutes, before everything went silent. I waited, holding my breath, listening for any sound of departure. There was none. I knew I had to move. I unzipped the tent, heart hammering, and stepped out into the frigid air. My eyes scanned the tree line, and what I saw rooted me to the spot. A man was standing there, half hidden by a pine. He was gaunt, with a pale, almost waxy complexion, and he was just staring at me. "You're a lucky man," he rasped, his voice thin and reedy. Then he turned and simply dissolved into the darkness of the woods. I didn't wait for an explanation. I packed the rest of my gear in a blind panic and hiked out in the dark, ankle be damned. The hospital later confirmed a severe sprain and said I was lucky I hadn't caused permanent damage by walking on it. I reported the encounter, but nothing ever came of it. I still work solo, but I never camp alone in the winter anymore. The memory of that man's face and those words still visits me in my quieter moments. What did he mean, lucky? Lucky he didn't kill me?
Or was there something else out there that night that I never even saw? My name is Jen, and for the last 8 years, I've made my living guiding expeditions in the Brooks Range, Alaska. My ex-partner, Dan, was the same breed of person, the kind who saw a week-long trek in sub-zero temps as a romantic getaway. We planned a 4-day snowmobile trip between 2 remote cabins, a route we knew well. The first day was perfect. We arrived at the first cabin, ate terrible freeze-dried pasta, and played cards until we fell asleep. We woke to a full-scale blizzard, the kind of whiteout conditions that erase the horizon and make the world feel like a small, angry box. We decided to push for the second cabin anyway. It was a decision we made together, and it was the wrong one. Visibility was nearly zero, so Dan took the lead, his snowmobile a vague silhouette in the swirling snow. I was focused on following his tracks when suddenly his machine wasn't moving. It was just tipped over. I jumped off my own sled and ran to him. The way his leg was twisted under the machine is an image I will never scrub from my memory. Dan was tough, but the sound he made when I tried to move him told me everything. This was bad, really bad. I tried to get him on the back of my snowmobile, but he was over 6 feet tall and dead weight. He slid off twice, the second time with a scream that echoed in the frozen air. He looked at me and simply said, "Stop. That's not going to work." We both knew what had to happen. I would leave him with our supplies, take my sled, and push for the cabin to use the emergency radio. I got him as comfortable as I could, wrapped in every layer we had, and marked our exact coordinates on my GPS. Leaving him there, sitting in the snow, was the single hardest thing I have ever done. I rode for what felt like an eternity, navigating by GPS and gut feeling. After about an hour, things started to feel wrong. The terrain wasn't matching my mental map. Then, through the trees, I saw smoke. Hope surged through me. I angled towards it, expecting one of the registered cabins, but as I got closer, I realized this structure was different, smaller, rougher, almost makeshift. A light glowed from a small window, and smoke curled from a stovepipe. A person meant help. I killed the engine and trudged to the door. I knocked, no answer. I tried the handle, it was unlocked. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly warm and clearly inhabited. A fire crackled in a small stove, a sleeping bag was unrolled on the floor, and a can of beans with a spoon in it sat nearby. It looked like someone had just stepped out moments before I arrived. I called out, but only silence answered. I warmed my hands for a moment, trying to process my next move, when something on the rough-hewn shelf caught my eye. It was a pair of binoculars, a folded map, and a spiral notebook. I unfolded the map. It was a detailed topo of the area, and several locations were circled, including the 2 cabins Dan and I had been using. Handwritten dates were scrawled next to them, stretching back years. With a sinking feeling, I picked up the notebook. It was filled with observations, descriptions of people, their clothing, the direction they were headed, the time of day. It was a logbook of human traffic, meticulously kept. The realization that Dan and I were probably recorded in those pages hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a shelter, this was a watch post. I was about to bolt when a scream erupted from directly beneath my feet. It was a woman's voice, raw and terror-stricken, coming from under the floorboards. It wasn't a yell for help, it was a primal shriek of agony or absolute fear. I didn't think, I just ran. I burst through the door, leapt onto my snowmobile, and fled into the storm, not caring about direction, just needing to put as much distance between me and that sound as possible. I have no memory of the rest of that ride. I somehow made it to the real cabin and raised help on the emergency radio. They airlifted Dan out just in time. He was severely hypothermic and his leg was shattered, but he survived. When I told the troopers about the cabin and the scream, they said they'd investigate. A week later, they told me a team had gone out but found no structure matching my description. The implication was that I hallucinated it. Dan and I split up a year later, but that day still haunts me. There are only 3 possibilities, and none of them offer peace. 1, I hallucinated the entire thing, the cabin, the notebook, the scream, while my boyfriend was dying in the snow. 2, it was real, and I left a captive woman to die because I was too scared to help. Or 3, it was a trap, and the scream was the sound of it working on someone else, someone who walked in just before I did. I'll never know which one is true. I'm going to end with a different kind of story, one when I was 17. There was a girl in my high school named Ilara Vance. She wasn't popular, but she was magnetic in a way that was hard to define. She had this stillness about her, like a frozen lake. Most kids found her unsettling. I found her fascinating. I even named a character in a story I was writing after her, which was embarrassing and, as it turned out, a massive mistake. One day, my friend was teasing me about the story just as Ilara and her friend walked past. She overheard the character's name. A rare, small smile touched her lips. "So, you're obsessed with me?" she said.
Her voice flat. My face burned. In a moment of sheer idiocy, I asked her out. To my absolute shock, she agreed. She said she'd text me, and that was that. That weekend, she drove us to a trailhead I'd never seen. The lot was nearly empty. She was more talkative than usual on the initial part of the hike, asking about my writing, which felt like a good sign. Then the trail forked. She pointed left without hesitation. I asked if she'd been here before. "No," she said simply. The left path was rough and overgrown. I was leading, and at some point I turned around to say something, and she was gone. I called her name. Nothing. I walked back to the fork, no sign of her. Frustrated and confused, I took the right fork, which was even more overgrown. I kept calling for her, feeling more foolish by the second. Then I heard a twig snap to my left, deeper in the trees. I saw movement. Thinking it was Ilara trying to scare me, I crept towards the tree as quietly as I could. I jumped out, ready to yell, "Gotcha!" But the person standing there wasn't Ilara. It was a man, maybe 40, with a blank, expressionless face. Panic flooded my system. I stumbled back, muttering something about looking for my friend. He just stared. Then he started walking towards me. I turned to run back to the trail, but another man was emerging from the trees on my right, blocking my path. He was holding a thick branch. I bolted into the unknown woods. They chased me. The forest was a blur of branches and roots. I felt a hand grab my ankle and I went down hard. I kicked and screamed, managing to wrench free, my mouth filling with the taste of blood. I scrambled up and just ran. I don't know if they followed. I just ran until I hit the main trail, and then I kept running all the way back to the parking lot. Ilara's car was still there. The other cars were gone. I called her phone maybe a dozen times. Nothing. I was about to dial 911 when she walked out of the tree line, completely calm, and asked where I'd gone. I frantically told her what happened. She didn't seem scared or even surprised. She just seemed mildly annoyed. On the drive home, the silence was suffocating. She claimed she'd thought I'd gone ahead and had been trying to catch up the whole time. It was a lie, and we both knew it. The trail wasn't that confusing. She disappeared on purpose, led me to that fork, put me in that position. The question was, why? We never spoke again after that day. I've told this story maybe 4 times in my life, and the response is always the same. She set you up. And I'm left wondering if that quiet, still girl I was so fascinated by was capable of something so casually cruel. The woods are full of dangers you can see. The weather, the terrain, the animals. But the ones you can't see, the ones that walk beside you and smile, are the ones that stay with you long after you've made it home.